Roy Ulrich, technical agronomist, DeKalb, Nebraska, Southern Ohio. So we're in a field of DeKalb 5327 that was planted on April 5th. It's April 23rd, so it's been 18 days since planting. And as you know, the majority of the growing season from planting till now has been fairly warm early, and then it's been cool for about the last 10 days. This field has actually, by air temperature, only accumulated about 82 GDUs. So when we look at emergence on corn, on average it takes about 120 GDUs to get corn out of the ground from planting based off of growing degree accumulation. So how in the world do we get this field at 5327 up and get it emerged on only 82 GDUs air temperature? Well, we've got a good example here of how corn germinates temperature wise, and it's based off of soil temperature. So as we look here, you can see this corn right here is in some conventional tilled dirt, pretty high organic matter, so pretty dark. So this soil is a lot darker and would have retained more heat and would have captured more solar radiation than a soil type that we're going to walk just a couple hundred yards away and look at. That's a lot lighter in color, wasn't conventional tilled, was no tilled, and so it would have been a lot cooler, so we would not have gained near as many GDUs in that soil, and so it's a little bit slower coming out of the ground. So we're going to walk just a couple hundred yards over here and take a look at exact same planting date, exact same hybrid, and look at a difference in emergence and how far along this corn is. All right, so we've moved just a couple hundred yards across this field here into what is a different soil type, a soil type that's lighter in color, so not as much organic matter. So this area planted at the same time, same hybrids, so everything's the same depth, except this area just would not have captured near as much heat. The soil wouldn't have retained as much heat as where we came from. So you can see these plants up here are just starting to spike through. So not nearly as far along as the area that we just came from. So a little bit slower emergence up here just due to the lack of temperature and the GDUs accumulation within the soil that the seed would have picked up. Not a huge deal, right? So it's not like we've got a lot of uneven emergence. Both of these plants here are going to come through within hours of each other. Just difference across the field. So as you guys start to walk fields that were planted here in the early part of April, expect to see some variation across topography, across environments, just because there's been such a drastic difference in the amount of heat that some areas have been able to accumulate and retain versus others. And then we're going to jump over here into a no-till field. Again, same hybrid, same planting date, just different conditions. We'll see in this no-till field, it's probably a little bit farther behind even than where we're at here, because that residue blocks some of that solar radiation, and the soils just didn't warm up quite as fast and didn't retain quite as much heat. So we'll go take a look. All right, we're at our third stop here in this field. So we've moved over into an area that was no-tilled. Organic matter soil types pretty similar to our second stop there, where we saw those couple plants just starting to spike through the ground. Had to dig down a little bit. These plants here, you can see right here next to my spade that they're about a ½ inch underground, so a little bit slower yet. Again, in this situation, this scenario, no-tilled, we've just got a little bit more residue, a little bit more cover, kept that ground from heating up quite as fast, so kept the soil temperatures depressed a little bit, which slowed the emergence of these plants here. Plant to plant, again, in this area, it's going to be great. All these plants that we found are right next to each other, so no issues with uneven emergence in this part of the field. Just a little bit slower than the ones we've been looking at earlier, and that's going to be pretty typical for what you guys are going to see in the field on this early April planted corn for this year, just because it's been so variable as far as temperature from when stuff got planted, soil type, drainage, tillage systems. There's a lot of things that are going to come into play on how fast stuff gets out of the ground. And unfortunately, with the snow and the cold weather that we just had earlier this week, may impact some of those fields on how successfully we establish a stand or how unsuccessfully we establish a stand. And it's probably not going to be very uncommon to see differences across the field due to differences in drainage, soil type, organic matter, tillage systems. All that stuff is going to play an impact on how we establish a stand here in this early planted corn. So we're going to dig these up. We'll take them back to the tailgate so we can get some good close-up snapshots of the difference in development so far. And then we'll hit a video here in a bit on some plants I grew in the greenhouse to show what to look at to see if we've got some early season pathogens starting to work on some of this corn. So stay tuned. So we are on April 12th, and the growing season in Ohio for the 2021 growing season really got kicked off in earnest last Monday, the 5th. So we had some guys hit the field with planters on Monday and got some stuff in the ground. So we're a week into the growing season. Currently, rough math, we're about 168 GDUs accumulated. So we're about half of what we need to get those little seedlings that out of the ground and emerged that were planted a week ago. But I've got some plants here in front of me that I grew in the greenhouse to really show what to look for later on in the growing season as we start to scout these cornfields as corn emerges, starts to get up, and we can now start to assess the health of our corn plants and really look at what could point to a success or a failure for stand establishment for this year. So we're going to go start over here on the left-hand side. So we're going to look at this plant. So when we look at this plant, you can see we've got one true thumb leaf out there. So you can see that leaf is rounded. So that would be V1. And then we've got one full collar here and the second. So this would actually be V3 corn. So this would be corn that's actually fairly decent sized corn. It looks a little funny. I know it's elongated and stretched out because it was under some grow lights in the greenhouse, but still some good structures we can look at and really examine what we've got going here. So this forest corn plant, I clipped off the nodal roots. So this just has the seminal roots. So you can see right there, you can see that little purple seed. So this was a refuge plant. So you can see these seminal roots comes out right at the tip of that kernel and starts to grow. So the radicle, or the first structure that's going to emerge on a corn plant, is going to be the radicle. It's going to come right out of the tip and it's going to turn into these seminal roots. So you can see those seminal roots, also known as the seed roots. So those are what gets that plant up and going and really extracts moisture and nutrients from the soil until that plant gets to V3 and starts to establish its nodal roots or its permanent roots. So these seminal roots, they should be bright and white and healthy. They should be browned off, or shouldn't be really short. Should be nice and long. You can see all those hair roots coming off that plant there. If you see seminal roots or you see the radicle where the tip of that root is browned off or is looks like it's desiccated. So this one I've got here, you can see the tip of that root is instead of being bright and healthy and white, is kind of brown and kind of desiccated. That can be a result of a couple things. So that brown desiccated tip could be the result of some in-furrow fertilizer burn. Maybe we got an in-furrow mix a little bit too hot, or we got our rate a little bit too high, and we've got some salt injury, some burn. We can also get the same thing from some 2x2. So if you have some 2x2 bleed over, some of that fertilizer can cause some injury like that. Or if we run into some pre-plant anhydrous bands that are too close in proximity, either within the soil or time has not elapsed enough to let that anhydrous ammonia really dissipate, we can run in some browning of those root tips like that. Or it could be the beginning of some seedling blight pathogens that are starting to desiccate or starting to rot that root back. But you should see nice, bright, white, healthy roots like we've got on this plant right here. So when we look at these corn plants, the next one in the middle here, you can see I left these nodal roots on, so I didn't clip them off. These are the nodal roots or the permanent roots that are starting to establish. That root system there starts at the crown of that plant and will carry that plant from this point in time. So V3 is when they start to establish until we get to black layer physiological maturity. So this is the root system that really feeds that corn plant and builds a lot of yield. And that's what it eventually will take us all the way till black layer. We look at the structure in between these nodal roots and the seed right there. So you see how that white structure right there, that's the mesocotyl. So that is a pathway for nutrients from these seminal roots up to this little corn plant
And that's what helps feed that plant until these nodal roots get established. Now, some early season indications that we have issues, especially when we get really cool, really wet conditions, kind of like we're running into right now, is this mesocotyl will start to turn brown. It'll start to desiccate. It'll get kind of squishy and discolored on us. Typically, that's some seedling blight pathogens. Could be a lot of times Pythium. Could also be some Fusarium species that will start to attack that mesocotyl. If that mesocotyl becomes compromised before these nodal roots get out and get established, then you'll see that the seedlings in the field will literally just wither and die, especially if we get a hot, dry period where we're not getting any uptake of water and nutrients. They can't get past that compromised mesocotyl, and that plant will just wither and wilt over in the field. So there's some early season stuff to look for on little corn plants. Again, we're still probably 60, 70 GDUs away from even seeing the first corn emerge or spike through in the state. But the growing season will quickly be upon us, and we'll have some stuff to get out and scout and look at. So just a few structures to look at once we do get corn up, and give you some hints or some tips on what to look at to figure out, do I have issues below ground? Because what's happening below ground, especially early on in the season, will determine if we have a success or possibly some issues later on in the growing season. So take a look at that stuff as we get corn up here in a couple of weeks. And hopefully we're seeing really nice white healthy roots, really nice intact mesocotyls, and a corn plant off to a good start and an awesome growing season. Thanks.